In the last video, I looked at the challenges that most NGOs face in terms of governance. In today's video, I want to look at the best practices that NGOs can implement to make sure that they have good governance. Specifically, I want to talk about the board directors of an NGO, the best practices of the board, so that they can be trusted by donors. So the number one thing is, of course, the composition of the board. So you want to have a board which has a diverse set of skills, someone knowledgeable in finance, you want to have someone knowledgeable in legal matters, you want someone knowledgeable in the technical competence of the NGO, so if it's in climate change, gender-based violence, agriculture, you want to have people on the board who are competent in that particular domain. You want to make sure that your board does not only have a particular gender and also a particular demographic category. So for example, you don't want a board which only has male people and yet it is dealing with agriculture. So you want your NGO to also have a certain composition of the male and the female. You have to be very intentional in looking for different genders that can add that diversity to the board. Secondly, you also want to make sure that the target beneficiaries of that board have a representation in there. So if you're targeting youth, if your NGO is targeting youth, then you need to have someone who fits that characteristic of the youth on your board to give the insights of the youth. Otherwise, you might end up developing interventions which are not relevant to the youth. Then also one thing that you should not overlook when you're selecting your board is conflict of interest. You want to make sure the people you select on your board do not have conflict of interest. When they have any sort of conflict of interest, then it is going to affect the decisions that the NGO makes. So for example, if you have an NGO which is looking at, for example, gender-based violence, but you have a board member who is at the moment having some cases of gender-based violence against them in a local court, that is a person who already has conflict of interest, and for example, that NGO is not going to be able to support the victims of that particular board member because of the fact that he is on the board. So you want to avoid such conflicts of interest. Also, if there are people who own businesses that serve the NGO, then those people should not be board members because they are going to influence decisions and get procurements for their own businesses. So this is very important, and once donors see this, it is usually grounds for terminating funding. So now let's look at the roles of the board. So the board has very clear roles, and the roles of the board are different from those of the management, of the executive management. The role of the board is oversight. The number one role is oversight, and then the second role of the board is to develop policies that are then passed over to the executive that implements. Then the third role of the board is, of course, risk management. So the board is supposed to analyze the risks that the NGO has and come up with strategies. Then the fourth role of the board is fundraising. So these board members are supposed to look for funds for the organization. In most NGOs, it is the executive director or some of the employees who go out there to look for funding. But you find the board members are not doing anything. But because of the influence they have and the connections they have and the fact that they are known to some donors, they can actually bring in or introduce, do warm introductions of the board employees and the ED to the NGOs and get funding. So one of the core responsibilities of boards is also to bring in funding and also to think about strategies that can keep the organization running even without funding. So these are alternative financing models. So these are very important for the NGO. Now, one thing that boards are not supposed to do is boards do not run NGOs. Boards do not implement activities of the NGOs. There are very many NGOs, especially the grassroots NGOs, where you find the board members are the same as the staff. So you find they have that composition. And when you're starting out an NGO, there may be that difficulty of separating the board from those who are actually implementing. But as soon as the organization can, it has to separate those two roles. The staff have to be independent from the board. The board has to be able to make decisions independently about staff recruitments, about decisions regarding policies without the interference of the executive and even the staff members. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the frequency of meeting. How frequent should a board of an NGO meet? So the minimum amount of times an NGO board should meet is quarterly. That is at least 4 times in a year. However, if you're able to meet more times in a year, that is fantastic. Now, in between board meetings, you are supposed to have subcommittees, and the most common subcommittees are the finance subcommittee, the human resource subcommittee. Usually we have the governance subcommittee and the program subcommittee, and you can have as many subcommittees depending on the size of the organization. Now, these subcommittees have to meet before the general board meeting, and their purpose is to get status updates, to develop the reports that are then going to be shared with the board members before the board meets. So it is very important for these subcommittees, because a board member is supposed to be a member of at least one of the subcommittees, and those subcommittees are also going to have some members who have the particular competence. So a finance subcommittee will have a board member who is actually well versed with finance and is going to be able to come up with a finance report. So that is very, very key. The subcommittees can meet monthly, can meet more often, can meet as necessary, as long as at the end of the day they are achieving the objectives of why they were created. Now, let me talk about the agenda of these board meetings. So what should be the agenda of the board meetings? Now, these board meetings are primarily meant for strategizing. They're primarily meant for planning purposes and for oversight. So the agenda has got to have items related to strategy, to reviewing work plans, to reviewing strategic plans, to reviewing the progress of strategic plans. Then these meetings are supposed to have status updates. If there are particular projects which are being implemented, then the program committee, subcommittee should share updates about the different projects that are being implemented. Any challenges, any issues that need to be discussed by the board. The board also discusses a number of administrative issues. However, if the board has selected a good administration or a good executive, it is not going to have a lot of administrative issues to discuss. But usually these are issues to do with disciplinary actions of certain executive members. This is to do with recruitment of certain key personnel. This is to do with a number of administrative issues, such as procurement of certain assets that are beyond the approval levels of the executive. So these are really the best practices for most boards, and if you execute these with precision, you're going to have a very good board, you're going to have very good governance. So while the board of directors is an important component of governance, it is not the only component of governance. There are other components of governance, and another important component of governance is compliance. So we are going to look at legal and statutory compliance as a governance component in the next video, and we are going to see the challenges and the best practices that the NGOs can use to make sure that they remain compliant to the government, to the donors, and to the partners. So thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.